G'day, everyone. Welcome to the Strength Within sessions. Today, I'm spending time with Trent Kingston. Trent was what is known in the Army as Boffin. He was in RAEME, working in the aviation space, otherwise known as RAEMeation, arguably the funnest word that the Army has ever given the world. Trent and I explore some of the experiences that he had while he was trying to prioritise his wife's career as a serving member over his own. Trent shares his journey of seeking flexible work options while his wife was posted to the US, highlighting some of the highs and lows that he experienced from career management and how he had to leverage connections within the organization himself to get meaningful work. Something that really stood out to me from this chat with Trent is that while the flexible work policies are a huge improvement from several years ago, there's still need for better management training, especially around the value of out of core experiences in enhancing organizational effectiveness in unexpected ways and in the benefit of giving someone some flexibility for a short period so that they will continue to serve long term. Fred and I also explore the idea of defence children being resilient, which is something that parents will often hear, and what that really means and what that pressure can sometimes mean for them and their parents. I hope you get something out of our chat today. Trent, thank you for talking to me one on one. You, Julie, and I caught up a little while ago, and I was really keen to catch up with you and just get your perspective. Because I think we often hear about like men in service who the career is their priority, and we're now trying to highlight like women's voices as well. But I'm like, yeah, but there's this gap where your experiences, I think, are really valuable as someone who was like, I would like to prioritize my serving partner's career, and especially because you're in a trade. And so I think that sometimes people imagine that the person who does that is perhaps another officer or more log or so
Yeah.
I think you've got a really unique experience that's worth talking about.
Yeah, that's good.
I think when we were chatting last time, something that we sort of said would be worth exploring was the challenges that you face when you were trying to get remote work to work from the US. So I guess talk us through, how did that needing to work from the US come up to begin with?
Right. So one of the first things, like when I was talking to my career advisor, that Julie had got a posting to the States for a year, potentially two. The very first thing that came out of my career advisor's mouth was, "You'll have to take leave without pay," particularly like when it comes to ORs. Uh, there doesn't seem to be an appetite for being quite flexible. But I've known lots of officer family, dual serving officers, and that seems to be a very easy thing to organise. It's a common thing to do, not so much for when one of the partners is an OR and still wants to continue serving. So I was lucky enough that when we found out about this, I was working at DFR in Canberra, and then what they decided to do is rather than finding me something to do, they posted me to schema. So I was in the RAEME cell helping out there. So I was a lovely little sergeant there amongst all the woe ones and woe twos and stuff like that. And I was helping out doing the management of RAEME courses. So I was there for 6 months, and then the plan was that I'd continue helping them do stuff. So I was sort of learning other stuff as well to help out schema. So once that was all good, it wasn't too bad because my career manager, once he could see what I could do, I could work independently. He's quite happy with that.
So sorry, just to clarify, so you were doing that work for schema anyway, and
Yeah,
then you were like,
yeah.
I'll
And
need to
so,
work in the US, and the kind of the gut reaction was you'll have to take leave without pay, and then they went, oh, actually, maybe we can show some flexibility.
yeah, exactly. So the first 6 months, because it was a mid-year posting to the States, so the first 6 months I was sort of learning all these different things that I could do over there remotely. During our time when I was over there, so I'd only been over there for 6 months, and the new career advisor's changed over, continued on with that little bit, and the new career advisor just flat out said, "No, this isn't working. We're going to cancel the flexible working arrangement," and gave me no option to recourse and try to find work.
Were you
So
given any information as to like what it's not working, like looks
no,
like what was not working?
no, just like no, come. This isn't working anymore. It's not in the best interest of the service.
You hadn't been like given performance management or anything.
No, no, no. So everything I'd been told was they were happy with what I was doing. New career advisor was again just it's too hard sort of thing. Because again, it's not normally something that the OR career advisors have to deal with. So I was like, right, I'm going to, is it okay if I go look for my own work? And he was like that. So I took that as a yes. Started sourcing out all my other work and stuff like that.
When you're saying look for other work, you mean like other places in the organization that could meaningfully
Yeah,
employ you? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that might be, outside of schema as well. So I had a
Yeah.
couple of potentials, and I heard received an email from a friend's parent that we knew. So she worked at the reserve, CMSA, DR, CMSA, whatever it is, and yeah. So she sent me an email, said, "Hey, I overheard someone bleating about you in the brew room, saying they've got this sergeant that's remotely overseas and blah 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 blah." And she just sort of piped up and goes, "Look, I can actually use him," sort of thing, and then didn't give the warrant officer a chance to say no, really. And so she went back to her desk and shot me off an email, and then that's how that happened. So the only reason that I got to continue doing remote work was because someone knew me and knew that we're overseas and stuff like that. So that was pretty frustrating in the first point, that my career advisor wasn't giving me the opportunity to source work to continue service. I was lucky in that aspect that, yeah, we knew someone who was willing to take me and just said, yep, I'll have him, sort of thing like that. For people that didn't have that sort of connections, I suppose, it's a lot harder.
And there's things there that jump out at me. One is that because you are more experienced in the organization in the terms of you're a sergeant, and because you are more, I would say it's not unfair to say you have a better understanding of the broader organization because you're married to a lieutenant colonel at the time, you're much more likely to understand your entitlement. So like when I hear like them going, oh, it's not working, and you going, okay, well, let me see how I can make it work. I'm like, well, a lot of people wouldn't have even thought to do that because they wouldn't have known that it was an option. They would have just been like, they would have just panicked, right? And it would have been terrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing that I find so interesting there is that I'm like, I get the idea of, oh, this is hard to manage this person. But it makes me really frustrated when I hear stories like that. And you hear them all the time, right? Of it's too hard basket. I'm like, yeah, but actually, heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? It's a manager's responsibility to try to make the capability work. And they hadn't given you, and I'm like, I get it that some people take the piss, right? We all know some people take the piss with a remote locality. But how do we stop people taking the piss? We don't just go, oh, you can't do it. We go, you can try, and if it doesn't work, then we deal with that. And I think that's a real frustrating thing in defense. I'm seeing that, and I'll have to be careful about how much I identify this. I'm seeing that at the moment for a colleague who's working remotely and actually doing an amazing job, right? So it's not about me trying to I'm not bad mouthing them, but I would say that their chain of command has obviously been burnt in the past, and so is like unreasonably watching them in a way that they're not for anybody else in the same role who's working, from the local area.
Trying to find something
Trying
wrong.
to find it, trying to go, you missed that email and that's because you're away. And it's like, well, I live in my headquarters and I miss emails too, right? Like this happens. People make mistakes. That you can't say that someone's not doing their job because of that. And I actually think it's something that defense probably needs to put more structure around it. Like I think the flexible working arrangement stuff is amazing that they're trying to offer, but to be honest, I don't know that we're equipping our managers with the skills to do it. We're still teaching managers like, oh, if it doesn't work, you just shut it down. It's like, that's not the point of a flex working arrangement.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. The standard answer, particularly from my side of the fence, was always no, sort of thing. And then, you have to fight to make it work after that. So I think it's not like, let's see what we can do and go with that. I always understood my career advisors. I know his constraints because I being an avionics sergeant on aircraft in the Army, there's very few postings. There's very few of us. So they are reluctant to post anyone out of trade. So I was sort of lucky earlier on in the piece. I had some quite supportive career advisors that once we made it known that, Julie's career was, took primacy, and they would reluctantly post me out of trade sort of thing to come down to ADFA as an instructor or go to DFR and stuff like that, which generally doesn't happen a lot within my trade.
Yeah.
So all they want to do is try to make sure they fill those spots because there's always vacancies within the aviation world. And so losing someone to an out-of-core spot does hurt them. But by virtue of the previous experience I had having out of core positions, I wasn't like sort of stovepiped into this single, like, I've got to fix the aircraft type thing. I had a fair amount of other experience. So, outside of the normal radiation sergeant experience sort of skill set, I had picked up all these other things that, being at ADFA and recruiting, and even working at Schema and stuff like that, that a lot of the other guys just didn't have. So
Yeah.
I felt it shouldn't be that hard to find someone who was somewhere who was carrying a vacancy, like an admin sort of vacancy to do, ops manager or something like that, or an admin sergeant. So But again, the standard answer from the new career advisor was, no, this is too hard.
It's like, I think there's something to the idea that the average person of your trade, of your rank, maybe they couldn't have considered it. But that's not how career management's meant to happen, right? The whole reason that we write out our little plan and they're meant to have a history of I've been here, here, and here is so that when these decisions get made, they can go, oh yeah, this is workable. And I fully get the idea that some trades are not going to be able to do that, right? Like if we think, and I'll just pull a random one. If we go second year truckie posted to one CISB, right? But they're with a serving partner and they want to post remotely. Yeah, it's going to be hard to justify that. And I would back that of like, this is what point is it an unreasonable person to manage in this environment? But it's such a waste to the organization if we don't make an attempt, of they'll come back in 2 years and they'll still have all their codes and whatnot. And in your case, especially, that's what I feel like is I'm like, yeah, I get it. Of course, they're like, you're good in that role. And I think you were the first person to use the term ramiation to me, and I just love it.
It differentiates between like the actual ground RAEME guys.
I love it. I heard it like you must have said it to me in like 2009, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But like I get that they're like, no, you need to do the role. We're short, right? But the reality is you were really clear about my family is my priority. And I think we need to use that phrasing because it's actually not about like, yes, Julie's career in terms of what you're giving them. But I'm like, yes, because your family is your priority. And as a family, you assess that Julie's career is the way to prioritize, right? It's actually not about like, you're not deferring to her because she's awful or anything. And you've never said that, but I just want to be really clear, right? You as a family are like, which career longitudinally makes sense to put all our resources behind, which is a totally appropriate decision to make as a family. So you were always really clear that that was it. So I'm like, it bothers me that they would go too hard basket because I'm like, too hard basket, you're very employable in other ways. Had you not got employment, it was kind of you to go, oh, I'll try to source this. I'm like, you could have just worked somewhere else. The army could have lost you right then because they weren't willing to be flexible. And instead they actually got service out of you for longer. I'm like, I completely agree with what you're saying of someone somewhere would have taken you. I'm like, I was serving then. I'm like, you could have been my ops sergeant. Sure. Like,
And it's almost like they fail to sometimes realize like the actual benefit of having out of positions
yes,
you can bring
yes,
back.
absolutely.
So when I did, because like I said, a lot of radiation guys don't get out of core postings. It'll be like down
Yeah.
to the trade school or Oki.
Yeah.
And then they go back to the flying units and stuff like that. When I came back after my 3-year stint at ADFA, I ended up becoming like the SSMs and the RSMs go-to guy for DFDA stuff because, we dealt with it a lot at ADFA. Coming, the ab initio guys, they're young, they make stupid decisions that we all made and they get in the shit. And so I came back to 5AV with a breadth of experience in DFDA matters, which generally a lot of the other guys would not know where to start, the sergeants, when they're, stabbed to go be a prosecutor or a defending officer. They just didn't know where to start. So I became that sort of go-to guy for the SSM and the RSM. I think it's worthwhile. Like just about every other call, to get promoted from corporal to sergeant, stuff like that, you have to have done time out of
Yeah. Yeah.
position sort of thing. So you can bring back those skills back into the units. I think that's actually one thing that the aviation units seriously lack is that the bringing in outside experience. And the only time we get that experience is when we have our loggies and stuff like that. I've been to CISBs and CSRs and where else like that. They come in and it's like, whoa, you guys don't do things like the rest of the army. So I think me having my out of core postings, I actually brought something back to the unit, and I think it's very valuable. Even though we are very few and far between, I think it still should happen a bit more than just going down to Oki to train some trainees and then come back to the flying unit.
Absolutely. And your sort of ramiation world it's not the only ones that have this gap. And then as someone who is obviously in the health system, to be honest,
Mm.
I see that gap when I have junior soldiers who they have sergeants who really aren't great managers, right? And you can understand why they're not great managers because they've never had to manage and then suddenly they're in a role that has to manage with no training, with no experience. Also get that, like, I certainly know people of your trade who are like, do not post me out of core. I want to stay in trade as long as
Yes.
possible. I don't want to be promoted. And
Yeah.
that's fine, right? Like, it's also
I've
about
known
going,
guys that have spent their whole 15, 20 years at 5AV or 6AV and haven't never done a spot out of trade.
if they want to do that and it's working for the organization, great, right? But I think that the idea of we don't need to view this as unreasonable flexibility of maybe we give the occasional person an out of core posting and what skills do they bring back from that? Because you're absolutely right. And the other thing is that most places in the ADF, or at least at least Army and Air Force, I know I don't want to speak to Navy because I'm not sure culturally about that, but most places what you've got is that junior officers go to that sergeant level for a little bit of advice, for a little bit of ground truthing. And that works really well. But when you've got people who also don't understand the system, what I find is like, and you see this all the time with especially I would say infantry, they have a very strong relationship between like platoon commander and platoon sergeant, is if that sergeant doesn't understand the bigger picture and the platoon commander's junior, easily influenced, they take on this stuff where you actually, you're not, this is not helping you to make the right decision. Whereas I can imagine
Yeah,
that you would be
great.
able to go, look, this is what the guys think, this is what I think, but also what I know is that Canberra tends to do blah. Like,
Yeah, this is what experience has taught me, sort of thing. So
I find that even now in my role, like I'm a civilian working kind of in a defence context. I'm always vague because, to be clear, this is not approved by defence and it's certainly not approved by my boss. But having been, you know, an OPSO, and to be clear, I was probably the worst OPSO in Army. I'd be willing to say that if my CI wanted to back that. I'm like, yep, that'd be a fair assessment. I was terrible. I remember a particularly strong officer took over from me. Her name's Jamie Lee Schmidt, and she's just gone from strength to strength. She was not a psych, and she contacted me about like handover, like ops handover is done quite specifically. And she was like, do you have this, 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 and this? And I was like, no, mate, don't have any of that. Like, here's
and just cuff it.
objective, here's what I've got, don't have that. And she's like, and she's very kind, but she's like, oh, you know, there was like a chief of army directive that OPSOs need to have this. And I was like, well, it's the 6th of December and I march out on the 12th and I don't have it. So I'll put in writing that that's my error and you can make that clear. But I was like, I don't know how to make that and I ain't making it in 6 days. Like, so yeah. Anyway, that is a sidebar. But yeah, even with having arguably been the worst OPSO in Army, I still find that just the things that I absorbed from having been in brigade level sort of communications now helps me to understand the organisation and contribute to the organisation. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing. They don't like giving psychs out of core postings. And that actually wasn't an out of core posting. They used to post psychs as the OPSO for the psych unit until after, say, and I don't think this is unfair to my colleagues, the two before me was just as bad as me, and we'd all say the same thing. And then the CEO was like, I need a non-psych to be my OPSO. And it was
Well,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
because you're specialist, sort of
yeah,
thing. And so
yeah.
I
Oh,
suppose that's the same
and also,
thing with us. We're
yeah.
a very specialised trade. They want to use you for your trade, what you've been trained for.
So that's a waste, right? And so that's why it really resonates with me, that idea of like, gosh, it's a shame if they won't give you flexibility. Because I'm like, if they give you sufficient flexibility, you can then come back and contribute in trade. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
bring so much more back.
yeah. And so then when you were working, and I mean, like you sort of got that through backdoor means, which is also frustrating. It shouldn't be who you know. I think it should be about what's your experience and do you have a positive reputation, but that's a professional thing, not a does my friend's mum happen to hear someone talking shit about me in the break room? That's not a management
Yeah,
strategy.
and of course, like when that went down, like my career manager was ecstatic that this happened. He begrudgingly extended my flexible work request, but so much to say that, like I said, when I came out, like we were coming back from the States, and I sort of gave him the heads up. I said, hey, look, 20 years is up. 6 months after I get back, 6 months, 9 months after I got back, and I was like, oh, I'm just looking just for something in Canberra while Jules does her thing, and I'll start my transition process at the 20 years. And so I got the good old pineapple when I came back, and straight out to third class RMC for. So,
You've never even thought about it this way, so you might not have an answer, but I'm curious. Do you think that if you'd felt more supported throughout those last couple of years, like just before the US and in the US, that you might have not got out at 20 years, or you think that was probably pretty firm anyway?
I think it's largely probably pretty firm because our youngest wasn't as. Everyone wants to say the kids are what's the word I'm looking for? They can
Resilient.
handle the challenge and stuff like that. My oldest is definitely like that. Happy to change, move to a different school, meet new people. Yeah, it's all fun. Youngest, no way. It was starting to get to that point where we were like, look, we think we might actually have to, I might have to get out because, again, the career manager justifiably wanted to get me back to a flying unit and start, promotion courses for sergeant, for warrant officer. My courses that I had to do, they're pretty long in length. Sub 4 for WO, I think it's like a year long. So it's like 6 months
Wow.
in Melbourne, another company, and then you have 6 months at Oki. Then the sub 1 and 2 on top of that. So it's just that it just wasn't going to work for our family anymore. We'd
Yeah.
already made the decision when we were in the States. I was probably going to just make my 20 years and then and hop out. Because I took the MSBS retention at the 15
Yeah.
years, so I had to start from 20. But yeah, it was like yeah, I think at least, because really with officers, if you want to stay in Canberra, there's a good chance you can stay in Canberra because there's so many positions down here. Not so much for avionics sergeants.
Speak to that point about that you said, our youngest maybe wasn't as resilient. But it's interesting, right? And I know that you don't think she's not resilient. You're just saying in the sense of comparative.
Yeah.
I find it such an interesting thing is that you will often hear people in defense, especially like in order to soothe someone, soothe a parent who is worried, go, kids are resilient, kids can tolerate so much, blah, 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 which I'm like, it is true, but actually it doesn't come without a cost, right? Like, and some
Exactly.
kids do thrive with it. Like I know, I definitely know families where truly the kid loves the change and everything. But most kids, even kids that like don't openly struggle, it is hard for them. And the parents are working very hard to kind of make it not a struggle, right? Like the parents are taking a lot of steps. Like I remember once when my daughter had changed schools and she was having trouble making friends because she's a bit quirky, and she had got invited to a birthday party and we were meant to travel interstate that weekend. And I was like, nope, flights cancelled. She's going to this party. Like you do everything you can as a parent to try to make it a smooth process for them. And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of important to acknowledge that of like I think defense kids, there is so much expectation on them to just cop this instability and go, well, they're kids, it doesn't bother them. And I'm like, well, it does have impacts, and you see that in them as kids, but then I see that when I meet adults who are the children of serving members, and you
Yeah.
know they often will be like, they make friendships for 2 years because they're kind of like, oh, this is how I make friendships. I kind of just slot in. I don't really know who I am. And then they have to work on that as adults. So, like,
Yeah. But then, is it a meaningful friendship either?
yeah, yeah. So I think taking that into account, I'm like, yeah, that's part of it. Like, sometimes people ask me, they say, oh, what were your reasons for getting out of army? And there's a few there. But like one thing for me is that I go, I think if I didn't have kids, I probably still would be in, really. Like, I think it probably still would have worked for me.
Yeah,
So
and that's the thing. Julie and I could have made it work if it was just us, sort of thing. But when you start having kids, there's other factors at play that you have to consider, and other people you have to consider because they're kids, but they're still people. So
and I think that is something that some bosses maybe don't get. And it's not just bosses that don't have kids. It's also bosses who maybe they don't have the relationship with their kids that is the kind that we would want to have. And I mean that in the sense of there are some people who sort of go, kids just tolerate it or whatever, and then they pop off at 18 and they're a person you have around for Christmas, right? But I'm like, no,
it should be seen and not heard.
yeah, yeah. My thing is, I'm like, no, I would like my kids to be the kind of person that I would want to be friends with as an adult. Like, I don't want to be their friend because that's not good as a parent, right? But that's what I want. I want them to be a good person, and I also want them to be able to look back and go, my parents were good. Like, they were good parents. They weren't just good officers, soldiers, whatever. And I'm always careful saying stuff like that because it's not a judgment on people that have a different approach, but it's just that you got to live with what works for you. And I know that you and I align very much in parenting because because our families know each other. So yeah.
Come on, I was Lexi's dad at daycare, wasn't I? For,
Yeah, you
for a
were
bit,
actually.
couple
Yeah,
of
yeah, you were her
pickups.
dad at daycare for a bit now that I think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it is interesting, I think, because it is something that the organization is not built around that. The organization is still built around it's the 1940s. Mum stays at home. The
Yeah.
economy is such that mum can stay at home and that the kids can tolerate it.
I think we're definitely better than we were, but
Well,
there's
yeah,
there's
yeah,
still
huge improvement,
there's
huge
still
improvement.
a long way to go, I think, when it comes to, hey, a father, rightly so, should be a father as well, and an active member of raising the children. And sometimes that means that the father becomes the primary caregiver for the children, and then defence needs to be able to work that in, sort of thing, if they want to be able to keep retain these people.
It's like I think there is huge progress even since you guys got out, there's improvements in that space. And so it's not about like, and I know you're the same. This is not us going like, it's all shit. It's more, I like to talk about it, and I hope officers listen to this, and I know that I've got people sharing it to different areas and whatnot, because I'm like, it's also about thinking not just about the policy, but what biases are you bringing? Are you making an assumption that someone's spouse can do something or can't do something? And both ways, right? As a female, there's been times when I've gone, oh, I want to do whatever task, and I've had a boss be like, but your baby is still only 6 months old. And I'm like, and I'll be really sad to be away from her for that week, but I'm not going to put her in a shoebox. She will have care. Someone will
Boarding
feed
school,
and clothe
boarding
her.
school, 6 months old.
Yeah, boarding school, 6 months old. And the challenge is you get people right. And I've got a friend like this who she was sent to boarding school when she was, I think, 8 or 9. This wasn't in Australia, it was in another country. And she's an amazing, amazing person. Like when you talk about resilience, just absolute resilience factors out the wazoo. But also, like, it's just hard for her to understand that children have emotional needs that should be met by their parents because that's not
Yeah,
what she
exactly.
experienced.
Exactly. So yeah, I think kids, yeah, they do need some sort of stability in their life. And the nature of defence being as it is, sometimes they can't give that stability that they need. So, and specifically with two serving members, two serving parents, it can be hard to give that stability that they need. So, you know, that sort of was one of the things that did push me. That was probably my turn to leave defence.
Yeah. And you're quite right that there are certain jobs and certain levels of jobs where you kind of going to end up somewhere. And if someone is an officer at the lieutenant colonel level, all roads lead to Canberra and lead back to Canberra. You might go out, but you're going to come back. And it's just, you're going to factor that in. Do we want to raise our kids here? If so, how does that work if the other partner isn't going to be able to get posted?
Yeah.
I'm curious to talk about your experiences kind of once people knew you were getting out and the context for that being that something I'm hearing a lot is people going, once people knew I was getting out, I was just blacklisted and I was treated like shit. And it sounds like you were, as you said, sort of given the pineapple and sent over to RMC. But I'm wondering about like the people in your workplace, how do you feel like they treated you and knowing that you were about to leave?
See, mine was actually really good. So yes, I was a third class RMC. I shocked a lot of it because you always have the armed corps guys there, and so I rock up and they're like, "You can't do what?" Because they brought in the EF-88 while I was overseas, so I couldn't give weapons lessons because I need to be
Yep.
retrained on the
Yeah.
EF-88.
Yeah.
I hadn't touched a
To be
pistol.
fair, the EF88 was easier, I thought. I'm like, man, I picked it up
Oh
fast. You would
yeah,
have been
you don't.
fine. You would have been all over it.
Yeah, yeah. But yes, I had to go do that course, so I could give lessons on that weapon system. Like, and being avionics or being radiation, we don't generally train on a lot of other weapon systems. So you have, Minimi, Steyr, pistol sort of thing. But that's even then, like the only reason I got a pistol qual was because I went to Timor. So I think that was in 2009 and I hadn't touched a pistol since then. So they were like, yeah, you won't do anything like that. So some of the armed corps guys had already sort of written me off, in that
Yeah.
aspect, being like, oh, you can do the admin stuff, which, I was sort of happy to do. I gave radio lessons and nav lessons and stuff like that. So I was like, yep, you guys do the pointy stuff and I'll do the other stuff. So I was quite happy with that. My third class OC, he was 100% supportive, like, because I was at one point, I think it was a little bit of a lull in the battle and I just said to him, hey, boss, any chance I could, there's potential for a job interview next week, mind if I go do it just because so I can, practice having job interviews and stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, yeah, no probs. And then they offered me the job straight off the bat sort of thing. And they wanted me to start like next week. And I was like, yeah, that won't happen. But I went back and talked to him. He's just like, yeah, we can absorb the hit. So the guys I was really good friends with, the other sergeants I was really good friends with, they were fine. They didn't blacklist me or anything like that. Didn't look down on me because I was looking at leaving or anything like that. So my experience was not like everyone, or a lot of other people's experiences.
I mean, that's
It
why
might
I
have
asked
been,
because I'm like, I want to hear about good stuff too, right?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm probably one of the one of the success stories of my transition to leaving defence. Mine was really easy.
Hmm.
Probably the only thing was like, because I was new into RMC and I sort of left after only being there for like 3 months and went on long service leave to start my job. I was just forgotten about. I wasn't farewelled or anything like that. It wasn't until about maybe even mid the next year that I had a phone call and they said, oh, someone realised that you hadn't been, and that might have been prompted by someone else had brought that up and said and had a go at them about it. And so I was invited into the sergeant's mess to have a proper farewell. But by then, most of the people that I'd known had posted out at the end of the year. So there were all these new people there that didn't know or anything like that. So that was probably the only thing that sort of marred the
Yeah.
transition out. Um, but like, I don't hold any grudges for that. RMC is a bloody busy place and trying to find time to do some of those things happens. So, but like, yeah, supportive wise, my all my bosses at RMC and even the guys I worked with were supportive and like, so good on you, have a great trip.
Yeah, good. That's good. Yeah, I think mine was similar to yours in that I felt really supported by my direct chain. My career advisor was a little bit interesting, and again, I get that that's a hard space, and psychs especially, they don't like psychs to leave. They don't like psych majors to leave. But so I rang him and I was in hotel quarantine out of a deployment, and I'd made the decision on the deployment of, oh, I'm just gonna see what's out there, right? And so I put
Yeah.
a little like thing on Seek that was like, if these jobs come up, just alert me. And literally my first full day in quarantine, like got off the plane from AMAB on Friday. On the Saturday morning, there was one, and it was a job at Laverack Health Centre, working as a clinician and supervising the provisional psychs, which I love doing. And at the time, those jobs were like rare as hen's teeth, right? Like the person who'd been in there had been in it like 8 years. So I was like, okay, this is feeling like it's the universe giving me a sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I like applied and I got the interview, and I hadn't even had the interview yet, but I had to talk to my career advisor about something else anyway. And I just said to him like, hey, as a courtesy, I want you to know that like, I'm happy to put in my preference for next year. But I've applied for this, and if I would be offered it, and I'm not saying I will be, but if I would be offered it, I will take it. And I said, it's 3 days a week though, and that was fine. And in terms of some other stuff, so I said, if it's something you would like, I'm happy to continue to support the unit, because I was with one psych. I said, I'm happy to go to CIRCAT 5 and continue to support the unit 2 days a week, because I knew that they might be hurting in that period. And it was interesting because he just like, and again, I don't want to speak to, I'm not saying his name because I think everyone can have a bad day, everyone can have a shitty moment, right? But it was like he just turned on a dime from having been pretty supportive of me up until that point to, well, we can't guarantee reserve work for you. So if that's what you need to like pay your bills, you shouldn't take that job. And then I was like, okay. And I went, like, and I wouldn't have said it, but I was like, well, now you're being a fuckhead, so I'm going to be a fuckhead. And I went, to be honest, 3 days a week as a civilian pays more than a major in the army for a
Yeah.
psychologist. I genuinely was offering this to help the unit, but if you do not want me, then that's fine. And then I told my CO, and she was like, yes, I want you. She was mortified. She was like, he does not speak for one psych. But it was interesting. And then when I went to leave, I was still under, I'd gotten my master's sponsored, which was an amazing experience. And so I still had a Rosso. I still had like 4 months, I think, left on my Rosso. And so I contacted Docum and said, hey, how much would it be to pay it out? They told me. I went, I'm willing to pay that out. Can I pay it out? And they went, no, you can't pay it out. You have to stay. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to, right? Like one way or another, I'm not going to. And so I spoke to my CO and I was like, look, this is a rock and a hard place kind of thing. And she was amazing. And I've said her name on another pod, and I'll say it again, which is Jackie Costello. Incredible woman, incredible leader, incredible psych. If every psych in army was Jackie Costello, I think you wouldn't have like the perception of psych would be different than what it is. Like she truly is wonderful. And I would have said that before this exchange. It's not just because she had my back, but she was like, Aleesha, no matter where you go, you will support ADF members, either current or veterans. You still like doing that is the most important thing. If I can help you so that you don't have like a bad taste in your mouth, I'll do that basically. So she let me take my long service leave so I could take the job. And she was right, because had she not done that, had I had a different CEO who had gone hardline like Dockham, I would have done my time and I would have kept working very hard till the end, and then they would never have seen me again. And instead what they got was another 3 years of reserve service out of me. But it's interesting because I wasn't farewelled either. And part of that was that one psych headquarters was Sydney, but I was in Townsville, and one psych was disbanded the year I left army because they restructured health. And so again, fully understand why. Like the people that would have farewelled me were my friends, and they certainly said things to me, like got a lot of beautiful like correspondence from them, but I was never formally farewelled. And then I was actually only formally farewelled at the start of this year from the brigade commander up here who had been my CO at CTC. And he actually gave me, I don't know if I can get it on the camera, like he fully gave me like this, and it's got
Yeah.
like all my deployments on it and stuff. And I felt for him though, because he was like, oh, look, I kind of wanted to have people here, but because you're being farewelled so late, I didn't know who you knew or who you didn't know or whatnot. And I said to him, and I was like, I said, sir, I'm so happy you've done it privately. I said, because this is so emotional for me. And I cried, because just that I was like, it is actually important to recognize people's service. And at the time when I was getting
It
out, I was like,
is.
oh, it doesn't matter. But then I was like, no, it does matter. Like,
Yeah. I was exactly the same. Like, it's like just a formal recognition of the time that you gave to the military. I think it's a massively important thing to farewell people appropriately. Again, I said the same thing as you, is that, oh, it doesn't really matter. It's just a piece of paper, and yeah, thanks for being here and stuff like that. And then as the time went on, I suppose I felt a bit hurt that you know that I felt like it wasn't appreciated what I'd done. I'm not one to always say, "Oh, look at me, praise me," or anything like that.
I would say you're never one to do that. Like I'll put it, that's not your nature.
But yeah, so I think it is an important thing that has to be done. I think that's regardless if someone's only served for their minimum roso or if they've done 40 years, like, or anything in between. It needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's something that I try to really reinforce to people and also that you've got to make it meaningful too. And that if you can, it should be someone who knows that person and serve with them. But if not, do get their PM keys things, see where they've served and think about what that means. Like I've farewelled people who had just done their Rosso, right? But psychs who have just done their Rosso. I remember farewelling a psych who'd just done their Rosso and they deployed 3 times to the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
Just because of the time period. And there was sort of a thing of like, oh, well, they don't have a family. They really enjoyed their trips, etc. And I'm like, yeah, but like, and I didn't say this when I farewelled them, but internally I'm like, yes, but it is hard to build a romantic relationship when you're away all the time. There's other things that they might want to pursue. And so I just always try to make that meaningful. And I think it is important for us to remember that. And for people listening who are in a position of farewell people, that it's there for a reason and it is important. And there's policy around it, is that they actually do formally have to be farewelled. And I often find that when that policy is really applied is because they're like, oh shit, this person might complain when they leave, right? Like
Mhm.
I've definitely seen that in welfare boards. Make sure we do the farewell. I'm like, how about we just make sure we do the farewell?
Yeah.
That's been a good chat. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, want to put out there? Well,
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think it's important that everyone knows that everyone's transition is different. Like there's no like sort of set template as this is how it should be done sort of thing. I would like to say that, everyone, I hope everyone has a good transition out, but that's just not how it works in real life. Some people really struggle. Like some people have really drunk the Kool-Aid and then indoctrinated into the military cult sort of thing. And then so they struggle with losing that bit of identity when they leave, particularly if they're going to a completely different field. So like when I left, I'm not in aviation or anything like that. And, I've known plenty of pilots who, they flew for 15, 16 years, left and not pilots anymore, and they've gone on to do something else. So some people really struggle with that identity once they leave. But that doesn't mean that what the person is going through when they leave is wrong or right. It's just different from everyone else's. So I've seen some people that I've known over the years that have struggled when they got out because it's not quite what they thought it would be, or they miss certain aspects of it, and we all miss certain aspects of being in the military. I think that's probably one of my key points, that whenever I talk to someone, it's like, yeah, just because I had an easy transition out, Julie's was a lot tougher with the medical transition. Everyone's is different. You just gotta, hold on, and just, maintain that straight course as you go out, and just do what you can to make life easier on yourself. One of the things I look back and I go, I missed, because I had that job offer and they were like, can you start next week? And this is on Thursday and they wanted me to start on Monday. I didn't have that sort of leaving decompression time after leaving. Even if it was a week or 2 weeks or something like that, that would have been marvelous. Didn't work out that way for me. But, or if you can, I think it's really important to actually have that sort of, all right, this is one chapter. Nice. Relax for a bit. If you can afford it, if you can
yeah.
manage to be able to do that, I think that's sort of an important thing.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought that up. I had a similar experience as well. It's actually really interesting that given our different backgrounds, how similar our transitions could be. I did the same thing, which was job is offered. They say they need me then. I'm like, okay, I want to do it. I'm going to take the leave, jumped straight in. So literally left one psych on a Wednesday, started at Laverack Barracks as a civilian on the Monday sort of thing.
Mm.
And one, I think it's really important to do it. Like, even if I look back in hindsight and I go, I think I should have had probably a significant amount of time off, probably like 2 months off, but even a week or something would have been better. Part is just because you actually don't even realize how fatigued being in defense makes you until you get out. Like, in the idea of my phone is always on. There's a lot of demands on you that aren't in a civilian world. But the other thing
Uh-huh.
I think is important, and why I really encourage people to have the break, is that actually I, in that role, and because I did what I call sort of a sideways transition. This is my trademark term, sideways transition. Aleesha Shimeld, 2025. Is that I went into a really similar job, just not in uniform one day, like in
Changing
uniform, and
is.
then right. inevitably what happened was that looking back, there's things I regret about probably that first 4 or 5 months because I was still in a military mindset. And I'm happy to give an example because also I think, if you've fucked up and it's affected someone else, you owe them to take accountability. And the example being that I had some interns I was supervising, and they really should have been my priority in terms of tasks, but I was still prioritizing things that would have been appropriate if I was a major. And it was just the mental shift. And I'd love to
Mm.
say that I self-reflected and realized that, but it was actually that one of my interns kind of took me aside and was like, "Oh, I feel like you're paying me off." And I was gutted because I definitely wasn't intending to pay him off, but I was like, he's a really level-headed guy, and if this is how he feels, that's experience he's having, right? And I had to go,
Yeah.
why? Why would I
Justify
be
you.
doing that when I'm a caring person who wants my interns to feel supported, etc.? And I was like, yeah, it's because a major in army with prov psychs does do what I did, but I'm not a major in army with prov psychs. I'm Mrs. Aleesha Shimeld, contracted to Serco at the time. That's not my job now. Again, clarifying, not speaking for Serco or defense. But yeah, I think that break is important. And it's funny because I said the same thing to my spouse when he chose to step out of army for a bit. And as you know, he's now stepped back in. And he, like me, felt that he had to take that new job straight away. And then in hindsight was like, yeah, I definitely should have taken time off. And I think,
Yeah, it's like that pressure that you need to grab onto the first vine
yeah,
it's given to you. Like, I always like, talk about like being Tarzan and stuff like that. You don't let go of one thing until you have a firm hold of something else.
yeah. And the interesting thing is that we've got to remember, having come from defense, is that you actually have a lot more flexibility with civilian organizations. And I don't want to speak about your experience specifically, but with the benefit of hindsight, I can now see that had I said to Serco, yes, I'll take it, but I can't start for another 3 weeks, they probably
Yeah.
would have still kept me, right?
And that's the same
Because
with
yeah,
my one.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you
So
don't
I
you
think
don't know that.
you don't know at the time. No, because like you're so indoctrinated. So this is how defense does things. I don't know because I joined straight out of school sort of thing. So I hadn't had a real job sort of thing as I call it. Sort of thing. And so that whole like, I that they said they want me on this date, and I've already said I can't get out that early, sort of
Yeah.
thing. You need to give me another week, sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah, because march-in dates are firm, right? When you've lived the green,
yeah,
march-in dates are firm. You march in when they tell you to
yeah,
march in. It's like, that's not how civil
exactly.
organizations work.
And if you can't, you need to send a demi-official letter to to the OC or the CO or anything, justifying why you can't.
It's something big I noticed because very common for, obviously, military psychs end up working with defense, even as civilians. So I manage people who are ex-military psychs. And I find that when they're taking sick leave, they give me this whole big thing. And I'm like, just the phrase, I'm taking personal leave and I'll be back tomorrow. That is all I need. I'm just managing a calendar here. Like, it's fine. But it's tricky. You don't realize those ways that, like, yeah, you don't know, especially for someone like you. And there's a lot of people like that who joined like out of school. They just go, this is what work is. And the break can be helpful so that then when you start, you can actually absorb the new culture of the workplace in a more meaningful and helpful way, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely close out one side and go, right, I'm going to open a new book
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
learn stuff from scratch. Don't try to bring in everything that I knew about working in the world. Don't bring that automatically into your new job because sometimes there's things not compatible. Doing cracking out the odd knife hand at, someone you're working with or for, you're like, you're a fuckhead sort of thing. No, you can't say that.
Still,
Stuff
sometimes
like
I'm
that.
like, I get an email and my team, because I work in like an open plan little thing in headquarters, my team will watch me and I'll be like, and I'm like, I need 30 seconds and then I can reply. Otherwise, sometimes that part of my brain is like, nope, Major Shimeld wants to reply. She's not allowed out. She got to stay back
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Major
And you
Shimeld has
look
a lot
around
less
sometimes,
patience than Aleesha has.
in civilian workplace, it's like, how do you guys get anything done? Like where I currently work, there's,
Yep.
it's all APS and stuff like that. Oh, a lot of contractors as well. But, yeah, so much just fapping about and talking about things. And I come out of a meeting, I'm like, so does anyone know what we're supposed to be doing? Because there didn't seem to be actually any decisions made or
Yep.
directions given. It's just
Yep.
talking about how we could do things.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's another thing I like to tell people. It's like, yeah, especially if you go work for, a complete, CV organization that don't expect everyone to be as direct to tell you what they want you to do. It's a lot of talking and cuddling and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Makes
Even
everyone
even
happy.
bosses, which is weird, is even bosses won't necessarily be direct. They'll go, I was thinking it would be good if we could do whatever. And it's sort of this we to the room. And it's like, who is being tasked?
Yeah, yeah. Who's the we? Yeah, yeah.
Is it me? Because that's fine. I'm very happy to
Well,
be tasked. I just need to know
yeah,
who's
yeah,
being
well,
tasked.
the way I like to also talk about it is like I'm a good good soldier. You tell me what to do, point me in the direction, and I'll do it. If you give me these wide arcs, left and right to arc, officers get a lot more between here and here, I want you to do something in there. You guys are probably better adapted to that. I think as soldiers, we're probably a lot more, you point me in the right direction and hit go, and that's what I'll go do, sort of thing. And I'm still like that sort of thing. So if my boss at my current work gives me a wide left and right of arc, I almost get lost and I don't know where to start. So I find that a little bit tricky at times.
That's interesting. Even talking about that, it's made me realize there's someone in my workplace that I'm probably inadvertently doing that to, giving him too wide and he needs down the line. I'm like, it's like, we're
Yeah.
all learning, right? Like, I think you got to be open to that. I also really appreciate what you said around everybody's transition is different, because I find that whenever I talk to people about this project that I'm doing, people assume, they assume it's a clinical thing. And I'm very clear. I'm like, no, this is not therapy. We're not putting people's therapy on Spotify. That's insane and very unethical. But it's actually about getting lots of different experiences of transition. And that some people, I interviewed someone last week who had, to be honest, just like the textbook perfect transition, and has gone back into defense and was speaking really, really positively, which was awesome. And I wanted to give him that space. And there were a couple of times where I had to go, yeah, but I promise you that log officers are able to get a little bit more flexibility than some other traits when we talk about some of this stuff. And he was very open to that, right? Very thoughtful, lovely guy. But I deliberately wanted to interview him because I want people to feel free to say whatever they want about how they feel about that experience. And if that means they say something bad about defense, that's fine. And that's why we're not an official thing. Equally, defense does a lot of things great. Defense supports people in a lot of amazing ways, and we're giving voice to that as well, right?
Yeah. Like I said, I have had a lot of support over the years. And at other times, not so much. And again, the whole sexism, like, oh, you're the male, you should be doing this, or your wife should be doing this. But that's only some people.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I've had constraints just by virtue of my job, and there's so few of me, my trade, my rank, and my skill set. So that constrains some of the bosses and stuff like that. So I'd say largely over my course of my career, I was pretty well supported.
Yeah.
If you like it.
I'm the same. I had some challenging experiences. I had amazing bosses. I had shit bosses. I had one so bad I considered naming him on the podcast, but I was like, I think that's defamation. I better not do that. Kept that one. That one's on the cutting room floor. But, the policies now actually are very supportive. What we need is for managers to feel empowered to apply them and to understand it. And,
Yeah.
and that some people who, I was talking to someone, I really would like to interview one of my friend's spouses because, one, I'm just trying to get more females on the podcast, but also because she was someone who, quote unquote, had drunk the Kool-Aid in from a young age, senior non-commissioned officer, who had an amazing transition out. Really great, took to it better than she or anybody else thought she would take to it. And I'm like, that's it, right? It's not actually about that a certain kind of person has challenges. It's that everybody has an individual transition out, and there are challenges and there are strengths. Like mine, I didn't think I'd have any challenges. And then little bits and pieces pop up and you go, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. And I know that I will have to retransition or fully transition at some point if I ever step away from working with defence members, that will be its own form of transition because I'm still so connected to the service in a different way. And so just
And
being open to
learning
that,
all
right?
these new things.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
'cause since I've left, I've had, how long was it? 6-month contract. That was outside of defence. But all the other contracts I've done have been within defence. It's that sort of, familiarity. Even though I'm working with APS, there's still, the terminology is used and stuff like that. It's that when you finally do that, stepping away from defence completely, it's a whole new kettle of fish to learn things.
Yeah. And I would really encourage people that don't feel that just because it's 8 years after transition doesn't mean that it's still not something that you can get a bit of support for. Like Open Arms, for example, that contract is changing in terms of the support that Open Arms gives. And I don't know what it's going to look like, in the future, but it will always be a thing that is available to defence members. That is certain, right? There will always be support. Or, with a white card, you can go to your GP and you can ask for a referral to a psychologist and it's covered under Medicare. And sometimes people think, oh, but it's not it's not because I got shot in Afghanistan. It's like, no, but these things that we have done in service have contributed to how we're processing the world, and you deserve to access support if you need them. And so just
Yeah,
remembering
well,
that of
actually, talking about that, we actually accessed Open Arms because my youngest, I said, she's doesn't transition well and stuff like that. Her and I are probably a little bit alike, and we, headbutt at times because she's quite. I think she's got the worst of both Julie and I. So, we try to be explain why you've said no to things and stuff like that. Give a reason, not just like, my parents, where it was like, I'd ask for something, they go, no, and continue on. It's like, no, we can't do that because of these timings and stuff like that. So, for instance, 2 nights ago, Annalisa's like, can I go up and see Josh up the road? This is at 5:20 in the afternoon. I'm like, no, honey, because Josh, I know his family have dinner soon and stuff like that, because they got a young family. And she was off the handle. So it used to be a lot worse because I'd sort of try to explain. She'd dig her heels in, and then I'd dig my heels in, and then we'd yell at each other. We'd both go opposite directions. So we ended up, no, just particularly also because Jasmine was so compliant, I
Yeah.
suppose, my oldest child. So we looked into open arms to see if we can have some counselling between Annalise and I, sort of thing. So we did that for a period of, I don't know, about probably 3 months, on a weekly, fortnightly basis, something like that. And I think that helped a lot, just getting Annalise to help, talk through feelings, and then me giving me some strategies to help communicate with her. So, and like I've been out now out of full time for 5 years, or very nearly 5 years, sort of thing. So yeah, it's one of those things that so I didn't really think about it at the time. When Julie popped up, she goes, "Oh no, we can still access help through open arms."
Yeah.
So that's always, I think, an important thing for people to know, is that even though you haven't been wearing a uniform for a while, you have worn a uniform, so there is still that psych support. Sometimes it can take longer to get in. I think it took us a couple of months to actually get
Okay.
an appointment, but it's there, and they'll get to you. Sometimes, if it's not an urgent thing, it can take a little bit of time to get that support.
Which is actually something that I try to push to people of. Psychs will always talk about early intervention is best, right? When you notice the problem, you get help straight away. And part of that is because, like with mental health conditions, like we want to get on it straight away because then it stops it from getting worse, right? It's also just not a
Yeah,
bad thing to keep in mind of, if you get an inkling, once you're out, right, services take longer to access. So if you get an inkling, it's worth engaging with a service like Open Arms or however you're going to do it, or book in a GP appointment or whatever. And then if you were wrong and everything's all good, you can just cancel it, but it will help you because ADF members are very used to really responsive healthcare. And there's a lot of evidence that says that that is a challenge for people when they get out of, like, I can't just see a doctor right now because I want to, like.
my gosh, I was seeing stuff for some of my injuries, and like I had seeing physio on a weekly basis, sort of thing. It's like just a long term thing. It's never going to get better. So having the massages on my back from physio was great, but like having the referral that only lasts for 12 visits for 12 months, and at the stage I was seeing the physio weekly, so I'd make a booking with my doctor, and it would take nearly 4 months to get in to see him again. So I had to book in straight away, and so luckily enough, I've been able to find a new doctor who has a lot more availability, only a couple of days. But yeah, as you said, in service, you go to the REP, and you can pretty much be seeing physio in, 2 or 3 days' time. So, so yes,
Oh, and it is. It's a big adjustment. I have to do the same thing with my GP, of that I basically have a standing appointment every 2 months, and then sort of a week out, I go, I don't need that, and I cancel it. And she doesn't care, right? Because for a GP, she'll fill that day.
yeah.
She's encouraged me to do that, and she says she does it with a lot of ADF members because we're not very good at proactive healthcare, but we are good at keeping track of appointments.
Until I got my text message the day before because I haven't put it in my calendar, and I was like, oh yeah,
Well,
I've got an
my
appointment
GP
tomorrow.
clinic is run by someone who's ex-military, and they do text, and I wonder sometimes if it's because of that. You get like a 3-day out and then a day before. And if you haven't replied, the staff call you. I think it must just be all veterans, because in Townsville, there's a lot of like medical places that can just service veterans. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, that is a good chat. Thank you so much for taking the time. So for
Well, thank
everybody
you for
listening,
having me, making me famous.
oh yes, yeah. Well, I was going to say, so it's going to go on Spotify, but I also put things on YouTube just because I like to try to get information out there. And so if you're listening on Spotify, I want you to know that Trent is a very good looking guy, has beautiful eyes, green shirt's really working for him today. You should definitely jump on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yep,
noticed
there
it's
we
a
go.
Homer
My
Simpson
Homer
shirt.
Simpson shirt.
I did notice that, bringing out his eyes. And Trent's really tall too, if that matters. How tall are you?
6'4", 190, what's that, 196 centimeters.
Now, am I objectifying you
What
to
does that
get more
matter?
views on my YouTube? Yes,
I'm
I am.
married, I'm taken.
No, but people can look. You can tell Julie I did it. I'll cop it. I'm going to get a message from Trent's wife that's like, "We're never being on your podcast again." No, that was just my silly way of just kind of explaining, I guess, to everybody of why is it on YouTube and Spotify. It's just because some people have Spotify, some people have YouTube. It's just a way of getting more info out there. I'm trying to get more material on TikTok as well, but I'm 41 and something in my brain doesn't want to do TikTok. And so I'm working on that. I will not be like making TikToks in the sense of there will be no K-pop dances taking place,
Oh,
but it's just about trying to get the message to people, especially younger veterans, right? Because like different social medias are kind of there's more people on different things. Well, thank you again.
that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you again, Trent, for taking the time to have that chat with me today. I certainly found that discussion really meaningful. I think that Trent's experience, I'm sure it's not unique to him, but it's perhaps not something that we hear about a lot. And I thought that was important, particularly as I've recently interviewed someone who was probably granted a lot more flexibility and was able to over the course of their career. I just want to remind everyone that this is not an official podcast. We are in no way associated with the Department of Defense. I mentioned a previous employer, Serco. Equally, I do not speak on behalf of them, Department of Defense, etc. This is the world according to the people who you see on the podcast or hear on the podcast. Please remember that if anything comes up for you that was challenging or you need support, as Trent and I discussed today, there's lots of supports available. You can access Open Arms. You can go to your local GP. As we like to say, you don't need to fight alone. There's a lot of supports out there for you. Please use them. I also want to say thank you to Julie Kingston, who I know will be a good sport about the fact that I slightly sexually harassed her husband right towards the end there, just trying to drive up views. I stand by it. I'll do it again.